Darren and Dahlia Rutier, a young couple in their mid-20s, have 3 children, 6-year-old Devin, 5-year-old Damon, and 8-month-old Drake. Darren Rutier is a successful entrepreneur, Dahlia is a housewife and looks after the children. On the evening of June 6th, Darren Rutier goes to bed early with his 8-month-old son, Drake. The 2 older boys had fallen asleep in front of the TV in the living room. Their mother is asleep on the sofa. Dahlia later tells the police what happens next. Shortly after 2 a.m., a man breaks into the house. He stabs the 2 sleeping children and then threatens Dahlia with a knife. After a short fight, the burglar flees and Dahlia calls the police. A police officer reports, "When I entered the house, I walked down a long hallway to the living room. There was a lot of blood on the floor. In the living room, the 2 children and Damon were lying motionless on the floor. The 6-year-old Devin is dead. Damon is still alive, but the 5-year-old dies on the way to the hospital. Dahlia is treated at the hospital. She is lucky because the neck wound is only just next to the carotid artery. She also has a stab wound on her arm. The police collect evidence and Dahlia is the only witness. She describes the attacker as a white man, just under 2 meters tall, wearing a black shirt, denim trousers, and a baseball cap. The fly screen in the Rutier's garage is cut. The burglar dropped the knife on the floor and she ran after him through the kitchen before he could escape. 2 houses away, the police find a bloody stocking. From the evidence so far, they have already ruled out one motive: robbery. Between the kitchen and the room where the murders took place, there were 13 rings and a gold lady's watch lying around. If it was a burglary or robbery, then it didn't go well because the valuables were still lying around everywhere. All we know is that this sick person didn't take anything except our sons, the most valuable and important thing of all. Meanwhile, the police are following up other clues they find at the crime scene. They suspect that the perpetrator got into the house through the fly screen in front of the garage window. Dahlia Rutier testified that she was asleep when the burglar murdered her 2 sons. She woke up when she felt a knife at her neck. There was a struggle, and the assailant fled through the garage. Meanwhile, her husband Darren said he was asleep upstairs next to his 8-month-old son Drake and only woke up when he heard glasses breaking. He only came down when the police were already there, and he didn't immediately ask, "What about the children? What about Dahlia?" Instead, he said, "Isn't Dahlia beautiful?" Darren said, "I can imagine what the burglar wanted with such a good-looking blonde. That was a bit strange. After all, he's just lost both his sons, and I don't think he knew at that point whether Dahlia was out of danger." In the kitchen, the police discover a set of knives with white handles. One is missing. It seems that the murder weapon, a knife about 25 centimeters long, came from the Rutier's kitchen. The drops of blood on the floor are photographed and samples are taken for DNA tests. The drops of blood are also examined for something else: their size and shape. The nightgown is also an important piece of evidence. The forensic experts hope that the shirt will also provide information about the crime. The blood on the sock found in the street was from one of the 2 boys. But not even police sniffer dogs can discover a trail that leads further than this exact location. Why would a burglar leave the murder weapon in the house but take a sock with him? Why would a burglar leave that sock on the street for the police to find, instead of throwing it in a garbage can or down a storm drain? The police find other inconsistencies. Dahlia testified that the burglar fled through the kitchen, knocking a wine glass to the floor. But the pieces of glass lie on the drops of blood and Dahlia's feet show no injuries. There are several blood splatters under the fallen vacuum cleaner and even an imprint of the rollers. It seems that Dahlia ran through the kitchen before the glass broke and the vacuum cleaner fell over. There was a blood stain on the vacuum cleaner handle. DNA tests revealed that it was Dahlia's blood. The blood dripped onto the handle at an angle of 80 degrees, as if Dahlia had bent over the vacuum cleaner. The pattern, therefore, did not indicate that she ran past the vacuum cleaner, as she told the police. Either Dahlia is mistaken about what happened in the kitchen, or she knows more about the murders than she is letting on. Dr. Mark Benneker reads a crime scene differently than most investigators. The biologist is a criminological all-rounder and the leading bloodstain expert in Germany. If at all possible, bloodstain experts always go to the crime scene to personally examine the distribution of bloodstains that originate from the crime. From the crime means either that they originate from the perpetrator or the victim, or that they have been additionally spread or squandered by other people. From this, we can hopefully learn something about how the people moved, which wounds were made, and which wounds bled, and in what order it all happened. The experts notice that the drops of blood on the kitchen floor have dripped into each other. This means that they came from someone who was either standing still or walking very slowly. Dahlia said that she was injured on the sofa and ran through the kitchen behind the attacker, bleeding. But when running, the drops would have to show a trail. For example, when someone stands in place, they often cause drip marks, some of which drip into each other, then form a relatively large pool, but are still recognizable as drip marks. So you know it didn't spill out on the floor, the blood. What do these bloodstains on the floor reveal? Where did the numerous other bloodstains come from? Are these all clues or evidence? And does this imprint help the investigation? Investigators are still asking many questions in the case of Darren and Dahlia Rutier. Dahlia testified that the burglar dropped the knife on the kitchen floor, but there is no evidence of that either. Apart from me, many other officers examined this floor and tried to find evidence that the knife had fallen down, either straight down or on the handle or on its side. But we couldn't prove any of that. There was a lot of blood on the knife, and therefore the impact on the ground should have created some evidence, for example, the outline of the knife. But we found nothing. Barry Dickey is a forensic acoustician. He's investigating Dahlia's 911 call to the police. Dahlia said she called from the kitchen and stayed there throughout the call. During his examination, Dickey hears Dahlia's voice and background noise from the house. A sound or voice in a room is either swallowed or reflected back by various elements. A carpet, for example, swallows sounds. Hard surfaces, such as a cement garage wall, reflect them. After investigating, Dickey has his own version. In my opinion, Dahlia had been in at least 3 different rooms. She moved from one to the other quite quickly. She didn't stay in one of these rooms for very long, so if Dahlia walked through several rooms while she was on the phone, that contradicts her statement. When the police arrive on the scene, Dahlia is holding a wet towel over her neck wound. The officers wonder whether Dahlia might have used it to wipe away blood. To find out, they use luminol, a chemical that glows in places where blood has previously been removed. There is no sign of blood in the garage, but there is in the kitchen. When we darkened the kitchen and sprayed the luminol, we could see footprints in front of the sink that made our hair stand on end. The footprints were Dahlia's. There was also blood on the cupboard under the sink. With the help of luminol, we could see that it had been wiped away before the police arrived. The drops of blood in front of the sink told us that someone had been standing there for a while they bled. There were several drops of blood on the floor in front of the sink. The DNA test showed that the blood came from Dahlia. The public prosecutor's office suspects that Dahlia cut her own neck and arm here. In the kitchen, the scientists use a special test to enlarge and define the bloodstains. The test reveals even more footprints, all of which are Dahlia's. If it really was a burglar, then he left no evidence at all. Although Dahlia claims that she was injured on the sofa in the living room, no traces of blood were found there. The traces of blood in the living room, on the other hand, show that 5-year-old Damon was initially only injured and tried to escape. In criminalistics, it is particularly important not only to look at traces that are there, but also to always ask yourself, which traces are not there, but should actually be there to explain a scenario. In the case of bloodstains, the most common case is that a negative trace is found. One such unusual bloodstain was found on the carpet. It was the clear outline of the murder weapon. The conspicuous bloodstain on the tip of the blade told the investigators something very important about the murderer. Such an imprint is created when a bleeding person holds the knife in their hand. The blood runs continuously along the knife towards the tip. We found just such a mark. Blood was flowing down from a wound on the arm. This was the only reason for this particular mark. The blood flowed down the hand to the knife blade. Dahlia has a knife wound on her right arm, and DNA tests show that the blood came from her and her son, and not from an unknown attacker. Dahlia testified that she took the knife from the kitchen floor and put it on the counter. However, she did not say anything about taking it into the living room. As the investigators continue to examine the evidence from the Rutier's house, Darren and Dahlia's behavior once again puzzles them. Just 8 days after the murders, the Rutiers celebrate their son Damon's birthday at his grave. They even invite a television crew to the celebration. If they had known Devon and Damon, they would know that they are now up in heaven having the biggest party imaginable. And I'm sure you don't want us down here grieving, even if our hearts are broken. I know Devon and Damon would love to see us happy. The investigators are certain that Dahlia killed her 2 children, but they look for a motive and find it. The Rutiers have financial problems. A loan application for $5,000 was turned down exactly 1 day before the murders, and they had taken out insurance for both children in the amount of $5,000 each. Finally, in the bedroom, they find a suicide note that Dahlia had written a month earlier, an indication that she was suffering from depression. At the Institute of Forensic Sciences in Dallas, Charles Lynch discovers the all-important piece of evidence that exposes Dahlia's burglar story as a lie. Lynch finds tiny fiberglass particles and some rubber dust on a bread knife in the kitchen. The fly screen in the Rutier's garage is made of polyvinyl chloride. The inner core of the material is made of fiberglass. Upon microscopic comparison, Lynch finds that the fiberglass particles on the kitchen knife are identical to the particles from the Rutier fly screen. Nowhere else in the house does Lynch find fiberglass that is even remotely similar. So at least I was able to rule out any other fiberglass source I found. The conclusion is that the fiberglass on the knife probably came from the fly window. But that doesn't mean that every other conceivable source has been ruled out. The rubber dust residue on the knife is also consistent with the dust produced when a polyvinyl chloride screen is cut. In any case, FBI investigator Alan Bradley is convinced that there was no burglar. There has never been a case in which a perpetrator breaks into a house, takes a knife, then goes out again and finally cuts the fly screen to get back in. Such behavior is not necessary in any crime, unless someone is falsely trying to portray the situation in a way that makes it appear otherwise. And that is a staging. The investigators already know that the stocking on the street has bloodstains from the 2 sons. But when they take a closer look at the stocking, they find something else, namely 2 polyester fibers. When they compare these polyester fibers with the fibers from the insole of Darren's sneakers, they find that they are identical. They also find wiped blood splatters on Dahlia's nightgown, on the back near the right shoulder. A DNA test shows that the blood comes from the 2 boys. A stab wound alone can cause many different blood patterns and traces of blood. There is not only the pool of blood that is created in any case if, or more precisely, if a lot of blood escapes. There are also sling marks that are created when the person holding the stabbing instrument stabs into the wound. This may cause blood to spurt out, but the bleeding hand or the bleeding stabbing instrument can also create a bleeding pattern when it is pulled out. The blood spatter on Dahlia's shirt is consistent with the suspected hand movement. With all this scientific evidence, the police form their own picture of the crime. They believe that Dahlia persuaded her 2 sons to sleep with her in the living room that night. Sometime after 2 a.m., Dahlia takes a bread knife from the kitchen and cuts through the fly screen in the garage. She then returns the knife to its place in the holder without washing out the fiberglass residue that forensic experts later found. She then takes the longest knife and kills her children. The murder weapon in her hand causes the blood spatter on the back of the nightgown on her right shoulder. She lays the stocking on the street to give the impression that the murderer has fled. She cuts her neck and arm in front of the kitchen sink. But then something unexpected happens. The 5-year-old Damon is still alive and crawling through the living room. The traces of blood suggest that Dahlia stabs him 2 more times. The knife mark on the carpet is from the blood from Dahlia's arm wound, which drips along the tip of the knife onto the floor. The acoustic examination of the emergency call proves that Dahlia is running from one room to another, wiping away blood stains and staging the crime scene. But she makes numerous mistakes. Pretty much the only place where no blood is found is, of all places, the sofa where she was attacked. She knocks over the vacuum cleaner, even though there are already bloodstains underneath. She covers up traces of blood that can later be made visible again. Her attempt to mislead the investigators is a complete failure. It's hard to explain, but the children were in her way. They didn't fit in with her lifestyle, her goals, and everything she wanted to do. And then she simply decided that the children should no longer stand in her way. Dahlia Rutier is arrested and charged with the murder of her 2 sons. Darren remains free and continues to deny having anything to do with the crime. There is no single reason for Dahlia's crime. It is a combination of several things. It wasn't the money. She had multiple births and therefore a lot of responsibility. We found out that Darren didn't care much for the children. On the outside, they seemed to be the perfect family, and they did everything together as a family. But their family life was an illusion that they imposed on everyone. At the trial, the defense psychiatrist tries to explain Dahlia's convoluted story with traumatic memory loss. But the jury is not convinced. Dahlia Rutier is found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. She sits on death row awaiting the execution of her sentence.